Welcome, Season Sixers. As always, thank you for being part of our Color Success podcast family. I'm your favorite host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Keep your eyes peeled for my brand new book coming out. It's called Cancel the Filter, where I share my experiences in the realm of mental health, both professionally and personally. Subscribe to colorsuccesspodcast.com to be on our waiting list. Seats are limited and being filled as we speak. We're also streaming on all your favorite platforms and socials. Whether you're on the go or comfy on the couch, you can tune in at your own comfort. As you know, we love growing discussions with our guests from our AAPI and minority communities. With so many friends and experts from different aspects of life, we love learning their stories and understanding what their success means to them. Let's get into it. Dr. Samartha Brennan Prescott is a board-certified primary care doctor at Optum Primary Care's Northeast location in St. Petersburg, Florida. Her background is in internal medicine, nephrology, and hypertensive care. She is a motivational speaker, multiple sclerosis activist, and elementary school activist for getting kids interested in healthcare. Her passion is helping patients and parents with chronic disease, such as MS, navigate their workspace and jobs, to be effective communicators of their needs, and advocate for living authentically while maintaining their privacy. She has been a practicing physician for the last 17 years with the unique experience of being a doctor, patient, and caregiver to a child with a congenital heart disease. This has driven her to share her story via her new book, The Parts We Don't Talk About. The book addresses biases during medical training from colleagues, racial inequity while seeking professional growth, pregnancy, and the treatment of doctors living with chronic disease. Her goal is to learn, grow, and teach from her own journey. If you need to schedule a free one-to-one call with her, reach out on her website at drsamarta.com. Dr. Samartha, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I can't wait to talk about being able to heal and cope with multiple sclerosis.
Well, thank you for having me today. I appreciate giving an avenue for a voice. I think that's important.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your journey with multiple sclerosis, not only the patients that you treat, but how you cope with it yourself.
Well, I think the ground is you kind of have to realize my experience has a lot to do from all three sides. I always say my experience in healthcare as a physician, as a patient, and as an advocate or a caregiver to someone in the healthcare system. And I believe we can learn to strive, but we should learn how to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease. So literally, your body isn't recognizing and is rewired, and it's actually attacking parts of the nervous system. And that can lead to symptoms. The one consistent thing with multiple sclerosis is no two people look alike.
Mm.
And that makes it hard. You know, if you saw a broken bone, you would realize it, identify it, and get yourself some help. A lot of people through autoimmune diseases and chronic diseases go through several diagnostic life before actually coming to a diagnosis. That impacts a lot of the journey.
Absolutely. Do you feel like some people go to the healthcare system and they get all these tests done and they're left with more questions than answers when we're looking at some of these symptoms?
I think that's definitely a big challenge with most people with chronic diseases. Not only are you looking for the diagnostic process has its own series of challenges, mm-hmm. and then the therapeutic process has its own challenges. And for, I always say, people who are not in the healthcare system, it's very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Even for people in the healthcare system.
It's overwhelming.
Yes.
So it really is an eye opener for me that we have to, learn, grow and share. And that's how we truly empower ourselves and others.
I know you've recently started sharing about your journey, and you wrote a book, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But what experiences did you have to then come to that diagnosis?
Well, my journey, which I really address a lot in the book, it's about start to finish of the challenges that I faced, where I think the key is we all try to do it alone. So in that process of being diagnosed, I didn't lean into enough resources. I take responsibility for that. And I also take responsibility now that resources that were available should have been more available.
What are some
And that's the
examples of
challenge.
that?
So mobility, one of the consequences or complications related to what we call a flare, an episode of autoimmune disease, is you might struggle with mobility. When I was first diagnosed, I got up one day and I couldn't move my leg.
Oh my gosh.
Logistics of your home situation. I was stuck in a loft with 18 stairs, and logistically, they either had to ram my door through, or I'd have to find my way down those 3 steps with the leg not working. So I look back now and I go, how could I have run that logistics a little better? But those experiences we learn from, and I've grown to advocate for anywhere I go. I know literally the staircases, I know how much activity level, I check temperatures, heat can affect you, cold can affect you. So these are the little tips and trips that can make things successful. I think a lot of people feel you just stop. If you can't do it the way you can envision it, then you just can't do it. And that's where it really came to a fruition to me, that no, it just means it has to look different. And you can experience things just like everyone else.
So you mentioned mobility being an issue. What are some other symptoms, although it varies from person to person, but what other symptoms or indicators are there when we're looking for MS or to those diagnostic criteria?
So chronic diseases like autoimmune diseases like MS can come with motor or sensory problems. So you can have issues with, like I said, spasticity. You can have issues with numbness, tingling. You can have issues with vision. Believe it or not, a lot of patients who are diagnosed with the autoimmune disease, multiple sclerosis, get diagnosed from the eye doctor, from seeing those symptoms, and then they get to a neurologist. There are also diagnostic criteria on imaging. So sometimes you need a scan of the brain and the spinal cord to be able to determine. Sometimes a diagnostic test is used for looking at the fluid in the what we call the spinal fluid. That's helpful in the diagnosis process. But here's the thing, you have to get to your primary care first. I always tell people, you want to get somebody who knows you, describe your symptoms, and go through the process so that you can get to the appropriate diagnosis for your symptoms. I think that's the key to it.
And, I know that you treat patients, and like you said, there's all these different aspects of what you do and to share your experience. So what do you think are some treatments that you've seen to be helpful in your practice? And does that really differ from your recovery journey or your maintenance regimen?
So I think the fundamentals are there. There are multiple therapies now that didn't exist before. There are over 13 different options for multiple sclerosis treatment, depending on the type and what your risk factors are. And that's what the neurologists really go over with you.
Mm-hmm.
But not only the medication, there's a lifestyle need change as well. That's huge. And I think that was a huge one for just me personally and a lot of patients I talked to. So what we put in us, in the diets we have, make a huge difference. I said the other day, I finally gave up coffee. And really, it took a while, but my energy level is higher without it.
Wow. Because you don't have that huge drop.
Yeah, you get it. It's hard. We program in our society to be gladiators and, be able to stand up to whatever is facing. But really, are we listening to our bodies? If we're struggling with brain fog, if we're struggling with fatigue, are we treating ourselves right to be able to address that? How important are we seeing sleep? I tell people this is significant in your care, not just in chronic autoimmune diseases, but your overall wellness.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing I think is key in the therapeutic plan is mental health, mental wellness. Are you checking in with yourself? Are you leaning into the resources emotionally that you need at the time you need it? A lot of us feel we have to do it alone. And I really do try to express that we were never meant to be alone. We are humans and we're meant to connect and use resources that, are out there. So I think mental wellness, seeing a therapist, I talk about that in the book. I talk about how you can create a plan towards checking in with your own mental wellness.
And a support groups are really helpful as well. In my field, we have a lot of groups that really address some of the concerns of the patient population, and having your experience, not only do you get to share with other people, but hear their stories as well. And that real-time feedback is so helpful for mental wellness.
You are so correct. I attend groups. With other people like me, and we meet up once a month. And I always say, you've never known a diagnosis code or a diagnosis until you meet people also with it. Because it's not just about treating, it's about thriving with it, right? It's not just about meds. It's how do you triage having young kids and coping with the heat? What tricks?
Yes. And global warming is here, people.
Seriously. But it's important. Are you gonna, manage your energy levels so that you can be successful to be, a part of the things you want to be a part of? So really being intentional about how you go through your day makes a huge difference in your success level.
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about treatment, and the other part is, what are some myths that are out there about MS, or even some misinformation that you've kind of seen?
Well, that's a great question. I always try to answer that question. But I always say the biggest things I would want people to walk away with is, one, no two people look alike. Two, everybody is on a different stage of their journey. And I always say, when you're approaching somebody, and you can ask, but give that person the grace to be able to answer you at the stage they are at. So sometimes, people are able to give you the information you need. Sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
You have to be okay with that. I also think people need to realize that not everybody is doom and gloom. If you're going to tell a story to somebody, there is no point in telling them in this day and age about that one classmate that you heard about that's crippled from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very small sample size.
I guess the point is, this is somebody, if you care about them, you don't need to give them the gloom and doom story. Trust me, there's Google for that.
WebMDing yourself for sure.
Yeah.
Which could be helpful in some cases, but there's also that caution there that you really need to make these observations and test with people that are professionals as well.
Yes. Understand there's a lot of information out there and you can't navigate it on your own. You're going to have to lean into your healthcare providers. You're going to have to let people who trained interpret what they are. And then you need to realize it is shared decision making. It is key that you bring your questions to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a little tip and trick I've learned as being a physician. All my patients know I have a questionnaire that they take home. And if they think of anything, they fill that out and they bring it to me in the next visit. Because it helps you feel heard.
Yes,
And I do
proactive.
This visits. It makes you proactive. I've seen patients follow with specialists for years and they've never asked them one question.
Well, and even to get to a specialist in itself, right? We're talking about navigating very complex systems. And I always encourage clients to advocate for themselves in these systems because you also write down questions in your notes app or whatever, so that when you are going to these sessions, you don't forget what you were thinking about, particularly in times where you were struggling and you didn't really want to think about it, but that's great tips and strategies that you just mentioned.
Thank you.
So one of the things too is I imagine that there has to be work accommodations in some cases. And I know that you're a huge advocate of folks working with their leadership, their HR, to make workspaces accessible and balance out confidentiality. How would you kind of walk someone through that process? Because that could be daunting too.
Absolutely. Now, I think the important thing here is the key is communication. And also, you have to educate yourself about what resources you have. So if you have to go on the American Disability Association's website, download, read, understand your rights. Also realize that every company does have a policy. You might have to dig a little deep to find it.
I mean,
you gotta look for it.
They should. So yeah.
So it's super important if they do, you have a copy and you read it. And the next thing you want to do is my chosen career, whatever it is, you want to determine how am I going to be best at working at my maximum potential of my occupation with assistance. Is there a physical assistant? You may need a break. What would optimize you working at your full potential? And that's a discussion for your superior. You want to be able to discuss that. Now, navigating the conversation is hard.
I was going to say, there's the fear of discrimination or actual discrimination.
Absolutely, because, a lot of the system is not clear as to who the decision makers are. But that's where you advocate again for yourself and talking to other people and finding the resources. It really, in this day and age, is more available than it was 10 years ago. A lot of it, I look back now and I wonder, okay, how could I have been better at advocating? As a physician struggling with chronic disease, I felt I had to be a gladiator. I had to be someone aside from everyone else. But we're human, so we need to advocate just like we advocate for our patients. We have to advocate for ourselves as well. And I think that has a lot to do with our mindset. The second thing is, I used to struggle when I was mobilizing from the hospital. My age group at that time, we were expected to nearly walk half a mile to park. Well,
Yes.
every time the helicopter passed by or the you landed on the building, I'd have to grab a stop sign because I would literally fall over. Um, and that's one of the things I think we have to think about these buildings, how we're going to navigate. And it's not just about complaining, it's about figuring out what could be your solutions and getting those in there. So one of my solutions was I went straight into parking and I was like, listen, this isn't optional for me. To be successful of what I need to do, I need ample parking to be able to get there without being blown over.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and, switching gears just a teeny bit, we wear multiple hats as working moms, right? And you mentioned having to advocate for yourself and really think about the plan that'll help you optimize your life. You shared with me that your son has congenital heart issues. And so you really have a whole bunch of stuff to deal with, as most working moms do. So, what is the toughest part of balancing? I don't actually believe in balancing. I say
Yeah, it's like
managing.
we don't really balance, do we?
I mean, it's you're
We
spinning plates in the air pretty
yeah,
much.
and I
So,
think
yeah,
moms do it best.
we do it best. And, the central aspect of my book is that it's hot, messy, and I'm 20 seconds from losing my shit all the time. So that's the
Love it.
central part of, thank you,
I
Charlie. It's coming out. He'll help me. It's coming out soon. But I think, given that when I talk to other moms, they're like, oh, I so relate to that, right? So, but with the additional medical considerations that you have to do for him, how do you manage these different aspects of your life?
the first step is grace. Give yourself grace. You know you and you know your heart, what you want to achieve, but sometimes the dishes don't get done. Sometimes you have to be a little bit more organized when you're dealing. I think that helped me a lot. I also think using the support you have around you. So, one thing having a child with congenital heart disease really did for me was teach me how to advocate. I
Because
must say,
it's for someone you love, and
yes,
that sometimes is easier than doing it for ourselves.
it teaches me a lot because I got to see firsthand the world of healthcare in the pediatric world. And it was amazing. I thought, okay, come on, you guys can't really be this happy. Like, okay, let's talk in the
Excuse me.
back.
Oh
I get
man, that's funny. But I feel pediatrics, there's a special kind of doctor and team there.
team. I mean, when I felt the love, even the guy who was taking out the trash, he was rooting for us. There's a certain passion when you work in that environment. And all I kept thinking was, we should have this about everything. Why shouldn't we
Absolutely.
all be that passionate about our day to day? After all, we're there for 8 hours, 12 hours sometimes.
I was saying
So it
doctors, we're
really,
we're tended to be past that and outside of these nine to
yeah,
five, 8 to 5 jobs. But yes, it does make a difference when the environment is conducive to healing and treating in the most humane way possible.
right. The third thing I would say is support groups. Support groups teach you how to survive, but also thrive. Don't try to become the doctor in that situation. If you are a caregiver, you're an advocate, and you are going to utilize people and put your children around or parents. This applies to anybody that's a caregiver. You have to put yourself around people in the healthcare system that you trust and you can talk to,
Mm-hmm.
and you are creating plans with them that benefit their health, who you're advocating for. The other thing you have to realize is you have to create time for yourself. One thing I learned was you can't be it all. I always say when I went through this, I was very fortunate to have my husband right by my side,
Mhm.
and we used to do, okay, you do these hours, I do night shift, you do day
Yeah.
shift. And that's how we did it. The final thing I would say is when you're a caregiver to someone, you can't give them the caregiver burden. I've seen my son walk with 3 chest tubes to the bathroom and back and still want to go play ball. I don't know if I could be as strong as he was
Mm.
because children are resilient.
Yes.
It is a beautiful thing. I always say it's not a world you want to be a part of when somebody tells you you're having a child with a challenge, but it is a world that I wear proudly because I see how it teaches you how to advocate. It teaches you compassion on a different level. And it also teaches you to give yourself grace and lean into the supports you have. I always say my PTSD is not his PTSD.
Mm.
He is completely a happy-go-lucky kid, and that's how he should be. That's where mom did good, right?
Well, I was going to say, look at his mom, amazing person here, an advocate. And it takes a lot because, even when my kids are sick or had to stay home when they were younger, it's like it's really hard to watch them and feel like you can't do anything for them, that they have to write it out to some extent, right?
I get it.
And that's a really hard spot to be in. But then you see your kid just, like you said, thriving naturally, And so I think there's that aspect of support, but also not giving into that helplessness.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I mean, you're really inspiring. And I'm wondering if you could share one powerful message in this world. What would it be?
So I truly believe in learn, grow, and teach. That is the key to my belief system. We are here to connect with each other, and we are here to create differences in the world. And if you see that bigger picture, you realize everything doesn't have to be perfect. Actually, there is no perfect.
No.
So you work with what you got and just realize, give yourself some grace. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of what my book's about.
I've asked people, who do you know who's perfect? Who do you know? And mostly, like 99.9% of them say nobody. And then I got one answer that was God. And I was like, okay, like it just shows like the level of expectation that we have for ourselves, right? In terms of that perfectionism. And so it sounds like moving towards acceptance of the imperfect aspects of our lives would be a very healthy strategy.
Absolutely. And that's how I practice. That's how I live with chronic disease. And that's how I take care of a child. I think we all, at some level, want to thrive, and we somehow need to realize the big picture. You don't have to see it every day,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So, you're allowed your little pity party sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't deny the pain
Mhm.
or the struggle. And I think the balance is, again, in order to manage these aspects of how you feel, is to go through it and not hide from it, because that's when people kind of go more into the depressive spectrum of things. So just really empowering people, and that's exactly what you are doing. So, well, how can people that aren't directly in the system but want to help? What could they do? Either providers or just the general public. You mentioned architecturally, there's additions that can be made, but what can folks do?
So, educate ourselves. I think it's so important that providers, physicians, um, healthcare people see our own biases and brace for them. Don't ignore them. Don't think they don't control our decision making. They do.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see someone with chronic disease in the emergency room, or you see them in the office, recognize that there's a story behind that person beyond your understanding. How are you going to get to it to help them? I tell people, when you're a patient, recognize you have a responsibility to advocate for yourself. So you have to come prepared to your appointments. That's going to help you. If you're in the hospital, make sure anybody who enters your room, you write their name down, pen and pencil. It's your right. And it also allows you to understand more about who's coming in and who's doing what. You don't have to know the lab result. You just need to know what the care plan is and what determines it.
Well, and I think it's important when they go to the hospital that we don't invalidate what they're telling us, whatever the symptoms may be, because people may go in there multiple times and be sent away like, I don't see anything wrong, like you're fine, and then send them on their way.
And it's challenging because
yes,
you're right. The resources are out there, and a lot of people don't understand that different resources are available for different things. So you're gonna get the answer based on the resource you have. So a lot of times we have to come prepared, understand the resources we're facing, and be a part of the plan.
yes, and communicate.
A lot of us grew up in that perspective that we just listen to what this person says. Historically, medicine was practiced paternal, I always say. But really, if you are somebody facing the healthcare system consistently, you want to have a plan. You want to be able to be a part of the big decision making by getting yourself ready for visits and tips and tricks to do that.
Absolutely. That's really well said. So I'm wondering if you can tell us where we can find your book, learn more about you, and, people I'm sure will feel very inspired by your story.
I do speaking engagements in regards to leadership, in regards to pivoting from surviving to thriving. And I'm always up for a good book club.
That sounds amazing.
But I think the whole purpose is, yes, we're busy, but if you're loving what you do, it's a different type of busy. I say I go to work and I'm so fortunate that I just don't feel like I'm at work. I enjoy what I do. And a huge part of that is really just being able to surround yourself with the resources you need to do what you need to get done, whether it's mental health or whether it's the people around you. A lot of it is to identify your needs to be successful. And how can we do that? And how do we pivot?
So we can find all of that on drsamarta.com. Thank you so much, Dr. Samartha. I learned so much from you. And I think that was the whole point of the interview, was being able to share knowledge and see how we can empower people around us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the time, the space, and for all you do.
Thank you. In next week's episode, I talk with Charlie Levin on how to become a published author, including how to write a manuscript consistent with your interests. We also talk about what he looks for when working with an author, and chat about my new book on the challenges of being a working mother. So if you've ever thought of publishing a book, this episode is for you.